car passes by the orphanage at night in London. An old woman walks to the door to check on its lock, but she gets distracted and picks up a magazine instead. Sophie is hiding under the carpet and waits for the woman to pass. She locks the door and walks to the clock to change the time. She picks up the remaining newspapers and letters on the floor and turns off the lights. A cat walks with her to her desk where she puts the letters. She hears men fighting outside and looks out the window. She tells them that they should be quiet since there are children sleeping in the orphanage. She threatens them that she will call the cops. Not wanting to get into trouble, the men hurry away. Sophie goes to the children's share bedroom with the cat behind her. She is reading a book in her bed when she hears footsteps approaching. She quickly turns off her flashlight and hides under the covers. She goes back to reading when the mistress left. The cat suddenly hears a noise coming outside and runs to the balcony. Sophie follows the cat and sees a giant in the streets. The giant sees that Sophie discovered him, so he walks to her. Sophie runs back to her bed, but the giant grabs her and runs away. The giant jumps into a storm cloud and enters a new dimension. The giant brings her to his house. Sophie looks around for an exit and leaves the blanket she is in. She runs to the window and struggles to open it, but the giant hurt her. He walks to her and tells her she has nowhere to go. He puts her into a frying pan and brings her to the kitchen. The giant continues chopping vegetables. Sophie is terrified seeing his giant knife, but she still asks him where she is. She can't believe that she is in giant country. She hears yelling coming from the outside. The giant looks out his window and sees other giants walking towards his house. He tells Sophie those are man-eating giants. Sophie begs him not to eat her. The giant laughs at her and says that he does not eat humans. Sophie is still skeptical because the giant kidnapped her. He thinks that she does have a point and feels bad for her parents. Sophie tells him that her parents passed away when she was a child and that he kidnapped her from the orphanage. The giant momentarily stops chopping his vegetables and looks at her with concern. Sophie hates the orphanage. She thinks that it is not managed well and had unreasonable rules. The giant sympathizes with her. The giant prepares his meal and sits on his chair. Sophie asks him if there are other nice giants. He tells her that the others are not like him. She then asks her in frustration why he took her away. The giant explains that if he did not, he will spread the news about him, and the humans will do everything in their power to search for him and lock him up. Sophie tells him that she would not tell anyone about him and no one will believe her anyway. He does not believe her, and they argue with each other. Sophie promises that she would not. She begs him to take her home and that she is scared, but the giant refuses. The giant takes her blanket and gives it to her, but he did not notice that her book fell from it. Sophie tells her that she will run away. The giant grabs her and tells her that if she leaves his house, the other giants will eat her. Sophie insists that she can handle herself, so the giant decides to put her on top of the ship to stop her from getting away. The giant takes a glowing jar from his bag and notices Sophie's book lying on the table. Sophie looks at him from the crow's nest of the ship and asks him what is inside the glowing jar. The giant tells her that those are dreams, but Sophie tells him that dreams are not objects. She had not been dreaming lately because she has insomnia. The giant takes a magnifying glass and starts reading Sophie's book. Sophie is surprised that he could read. She listens to him until she falls asleep. When the giant sees that she is asleep, he hurriedly takes his bag and goes through a secret passage in a waterfall. He comes to a room full of glowing glass jars and works on a dream. Sophie suddenly wakes up and sees that the giant is sleeping in the boat below her. She quickly runs out of his house to escape. However, she has not gone far when a giant hiding in a mound suddenly appears and stops her. He screams for help, but the giant ate her. She wakes up again and finds out that she was only dreaming. She looks around and accuses the giant that it was the giant who induced the nightmare for her. He did not deny it and thinks that it is for her own good. That morning, the giant helps her to his table. He tells her that she should not go around without him. All the other giants will eat humans when given the chance. They are having a small conversation when a giant suddenly called outside. The giant stood up from the table and Sophie tries her best to hide. The bigger giant enters the house uninvited and is immediately suspicious of him because of the laughter he heard outside. The bigger giant wants him to fix his wound. He suddenly detects a smell of a human and sniffs around, trying to find Sophie. Sophie hides inside a cucumber. The bigger giant grabs it, thinking that it smells like a human on the inside. The giant encourages him to try it, but when he realizes that Sophie is hiding inside it, he stops the bigger giant, saying that he hates vegetables. The bigger giant throws it on the floor. He tells him that he hates vegetables and water and that the other giant is a disgrace to their race before he finally leaves his house. The giant picks up the cucumber and Sophie comes out of hiding. He smiles at her, glad that she is safe. He brings her to his secret room behind the waterfalls to show her all the dreams he created. Sophie is amazed by how many jars there are. He helps her to have a shower to get rid of the cucumber in her body and dries her by the fire. He offers her some human clothes that Sophie changes in. The giant sees the jacket she is wearing and remembers something that made him sad. Sophie asks him more about what he does. At first, the giant is reluctant to tell her about his life, but then he says that his job is to catch dreams. Sophie is immediately interested and wants to see it for herself. The giant puts her in a cozy tree with her things in it and tells her that she can't come with him because it is not safe. Sophie looks around the tree filled with glowing dream jars. She is mesmerized by each jar as she inspects them. She turns her jacket inside out, and it becomes similar to the one the giant is wearing. Sophie crawls out of a hole and made her way to the giant. She insists that he should not keep secrets from her and that he should take her with him. She tells him about her secrets in hopes that he would tell her his secret. The giant finally lets her come with him. Together, they go out of the house and pass by sleeping giants. The other giants are so much bigger than him, that is why they call him a runt. He carefully makes his way around the sleeping giants, in order to not wake them up. However, they discover him and grab him to make fun of him. Sophie hurriedly hides inside a car. The bigger giants throw and pass him to one another. Two giants climb on top of two hills, carrying two vehicles, one where Sophie is hiding, and the runt giant. Using the two cars he carried, one giant slid down from one hill. The other giant grabs the runt and slides him down the other hill. Sophie stirs the car she is riding in order to avoid a collision. This results in the big giant getting hurt and the runt falling down. All the other giants laugh in delight. All of a sudden, it rains, cutting their merriment short. The giant takes his bag and lets Sophie in quickly to avoid detection. The other giants see Sophie's blanket and immediately suspect the runt giant. The two travel to a mountain. Sophie tells him that he should not let other giants treat him the way they did. But the giant tells her that there is nothing he can do about it. They pass by a wall of clouds and it suddenly turns to night. They are in a dream country now. The giant tells her about the things he can hear from the skies and the ground as they approach the huge tree. He helps Sophie down. She is amazed by all of his stories. Besides the huge tree is a pond, reflecting the glowing dreams of the huge tree. Sophie stares at it mesmerized. The giant tells her that at some point in time, he was called the Big Friendly Giant. He jumps into the pond and appears on the reflection on the other side. Sophie starts running and follows him to the other side. She looks around and is stunned by the magnificent huge tree, producing dreams from its leaves. From the tree, a rare playful dream emerges. The BFG is surprised to see it since it is only produced occasionally. He quickly grabs his net and tries to catch it. He is having a hard time catching it. Then it slowly approaches Sophie and the BFG is finally able to catch it. He hands it to Sophie and she helps him put it in the jar. The dream starts to draw her image. More dreams fly from the tree and the BFG encourages Sophie to try to catch some. The BFG labels the jar as Sophie's dream. Meanwhile, Sophie follows a dream around the huge tree. Suddenly, a nightmare attacks the dream. Being unaware that it is a nightmare, Sophie follows it until she finally catches it. When the BFG sees her holding the nightmare, he immediately asks for it and locks it in a jar. The place becomes foggy and Sophie could not see the BFG. She calls for him in alarm and climbs a root to look for him better. The BFG grabs her from the other side of the pool and together they go back. Sophie and the BFG go to the human world together to give humans dreams. The BFG takes a dream jar and puts it in a trumpet. He blows on it and tiny dreams come out and go inside the people in the house. They watch the boys dream together and laugh. After the long night, the two of them are walking back towards the giant country. They see other giants walking around. When Sophie says that she dropped her blanker back in giant country, the BFG realizes that the other giants might have found it. Sophie wakes up in a patch of grass outside the orphanage. She thinks that she is dreaming and calls for BFG. He is standing a few blocks away from her. He tells her that the other giants must have found her blanket so she is not safe with him anymore. Sophie tells him that it doesn't matter. BFG tells her about his friend who owns the red jacket she wore. The boy taught him how to read and befriended him, but the other giants found the boy and the BFG was not able to save him. Sophie assures him that it would not happen to her and that they will stop the other giants. The BFG smiles at her sadly and walks away. Sophie follows him and says that she is not scared, but he continues walking away. Sophie has no other choice but to walk back to the orphanage with her cat. She climbs back to her own bed and starts whispering in desperation so that BFG can hear her. She opens the window trying to see if he is out there. She jumps out off the balcony, testing the giant to save her. The BFG catches her and decides to bring her back to the giant country. A big giant is hiding in a mound watching the BFG runs back home. Sophie and the BFG are back at the giant's house, thinking of a plan when someone calls Runt from outside. He quickly hides Sophie in his tree. The bigger giants enter his secret dream room unannounced to confront him that he is hiding a human. He insists they leave his place, but the bigger giants start to look for Sophie. They destroy the shelves, breaking the dream jars. Sophie runs around the tree, avoiding the bigger giants. She falls into a waterway and reaches the BFG. He tries to hide her inside his bag, but the bigger giant grabs it. He threatens the BFG that he found the last one and that he can find Sophie. Meanwhile, Sophie continues to run away. She enters another hole in the tree and realizes that it was the room of the boy the BFG talked about. The bigger giant detects her scent coming from the tree and he inspects it. The BFG is finally fed up. He takes a hot rod and drives out the bigger giants. Sophie is finally able to go out from hiding and sees a portrait of the queen. The BFG looks dejectedly at his ruined workshop. Sophie tries to cheer him up, and he becomes joyful instantly. She tells him about her plan to ask for the queen's help. They devise a nightmare for the queen where the giants eat children and a war emerges between the humans and the giants. They also include themselves to be part of the dream so the queen can know about them. The plan is for the queen to dream about Sophie sitting on her windowsill. When the queen wakes up, she will actually see her and the BFG. The BFG refuses to appear before the queen. The two of them sneak into the royal palace and proceed with the plan. He helps Sophie down to the queen's windowsill and sends her to the nightmare they created. Sophie watches her until she wakes up. Her daughter, Mary, immediately enters her room and gives her tea to calm herself. The queen tells Mary about her dream, and Mary sees that there is an article in the newspaper about children disappearing. Mary turns pale and shows the paper to the queen, saying that it is what she dreamt about. They think that it can't be giants that took the children away. Mary draws the curtains and jumps in surprise when she sees Sophie. The queen knows her and her plan to seek the queen's help from the dream. Sophie tells her about BFG and asks her to promise not to hurt him. Sophie calls for him, but he is reluctant to show himself. The queen thinks that it is not real and asks her to come down from the windowsill. Sophie tries to call for him again, and he finally shows himself. The queen's guards immediately surrounded him, but they are ordered to stand down. The BFG slowly approaches the palace and bows down to the queen. The queen greets him and he is delighted. He offers her his assistance against the man-eating giants. The queen immediately informs and prepares her army. Sophie is taken care of in the palace. She is bathed and offered new clothes. The BFG is invited inside the palace. However, he has to crawl down because he does not fit in well indoors. He is finally able to stand upright when they reach the grand hall. The palace prepares his food to have a proper meal with the queen. Sophie and the BFG are amazed by how much food there is. They are never able to eat or even see those kinds of food. They enjoy their breakfast together. The army generals enter the dining hall and bow before the queen. The queen commanded them to stop the man-eating giants with BFG's help. The BFG leads them to the portal to the giant country, and the queen's army follows him through helicopters. The army enters the fog and reaches the giant country. Sophie and the BFG go back to his secret dream room. He carefully prepares a nightmare for the giants. The two of them sit outside his house as the other giants sleep. The BFG says goodbye to Sophie, telling her that she has more dreams and adventures to catch. He promises her that he will always hear her. BFG prepares to release the nightmare, but he forgot his trumpet in the palace. Sophie decides to release the nightmare herself and runs to the center of the sleeping giants. She breaks the glass jar, successfully releasing the nightmare to the giants. But the biggest one is not affected by the nightmare and tries to grab Sophie. The BFG stops him and lets Sophie run. He is about to punch the BFG, but the army captures him and all the other giants. They bring them to an isolated island far away from anyone and leave them with vegetable seeds so they can grow their own food. Sophie wakes up in the palace bed. Mary adopts her and she now lives in the palace. She looks out the window and imagines the giant country. She whispers good morning to him, and he smiles when he hears her.